FutureDad 59, Russia-Ukraine. Gonzalo's goodbye to globalism. Quote, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." End quote, Plato. I don't know that much about the Russia-Ukraine war, so in the spirit of modern political commentary, I'm going to talk about it anyway. Gonzalo Lira would say much more and say it better, but he died whilst in custody in Ukraine. My commentary will be grounded in disinterest in the two direct combatants, except to say that, as usual, it's horrible for all innocents. Firstly, it's quite a confusing war. At a fundamental level, there are more questions than honest answers available in the public domain. Why did Russia invade? Who destroyed Nord Stream 2? What was NATO's role in this? Is the corruption in Ukraine a factor? Like any war, there is bitter polarization of pseudo-expert views. As usual, Wikipedia is hopelessly partisan, so it's not worth perusing unless the goal was a double eye infection. The mainstream media, of course, is hilariously one-sided. It behooves me, therefore, to be annoyingly basic in this essay, so as to construct a chain of logic about what happened and why. So come watch as I slowly birth this one out. Why did Russia invade? Russia is the largest landmass in the world, roughly the size of USA and Australia added together. Incredible, really. So the obvious question is, why would they go to the enormous bother of seizing a relatively small bit of land from a smaller country? Further to that, Russia has several hostile strategic competitors in the region: USA, France, UK, Germany and Poland. Politicians in these countries routinely urge the demise of the Russian war machine. They'd gladly see Russia weakened and facing regime change. The Russian leadership are acutely aware of this. So why would Russia imperil itself in full display of these strong nations by attacking a country with a standing army of 298,000, 3 times that of Britain? Invasion. There's more. Consider the obvious hazard of invasion itself. Invading a country, then permanently occupying its land, has been notoriously difficult throughout history. From Afghanistan to Zaire, no country on earth has avoided either being the victor or the victim of a protracted, violent land dispute. Russia itself repelled none other than Napoleon and Hitler, 2 seasoned military campaigners with much bigger armies. Both leaders knew the challenges of large-scale invasions against smaller armies, defiantly defending their homeland, Russia. Despite knowing this, they both failed. Indeed, armies defend their homeland with a vicious resolve. It's no accident that in the board game Risk, an attacking army must have at least 6 times the defender's army to all but guarantee victory, statistically speaking. In real life, even with overwhelming size and force, you are going to lose tens of thousands of men, tens of billions of dollars, and weaken yourself militarily against your myriad other well-armed contemporary competitors. All of this is what faced Putin when deciding to go to war in February 2022. Putin. There is a folly, pretend or otherwise, in the minds of some Western ideologues that Putin sat there stroking his white cat, imagining he just had to turn up, steal Ukraine, and have a celebratory vodka before planning his next conquest. Who next, comrades? I know, Britain. No. It benefits ideological puppets in the West to portray its competitors as mad, bad or insane, usually all 3. Western leaders orchestrate media campaigns just as aggressively as military campaigns, from Hitler to Hussein, in a transparent attempt to get the public on their side. The reality is different. Russians are known for their dry, pessimistic wit and calculating intelligence. They have more active chess grandmasters than any other country, in fact double that of the next highest, Germany. Ukraine is third. Russian leaders knew, self-evidently so, that it would be a difficult campaign. Putin certainly knew it. Therefore his invasion was carefully calculated and, as it turned out, restrained. Propaganda. So, sorry BBC and NYT, no one's buying the propaganda this time. Putin didn't lash out at Ukraine in mindless spite, but had in fact soberly considered the size and nature of the challenge. He couldn't know exactly how it would pan out. See FutureDad 42, everything new takes 4 times as long. But he did know it would present difficulties, operationally, strategically, and politically. So what was the upside that made the risk worth it? What was it all for? So far as I can tell, in no particular order, the reasons for the invasion were as follows. I shall simply restate what Putin announced days after the invasion began, plus some obvious, widely known facts. 1. Ethnic solidarity. Putin believed that his people, his tribe, were being oppressed. Putin stated that he wanted to denazify Ukraine because such groups were executing unarmed ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. 2. Strategic avarice. Ukraine has $13 trillion of rare earth minerals which are vital for the tech sector. 3. Retributive justice. NATO had broken too many promises about advancing eastwards. It was a punitive show of force to chastise that repeated betrayal. 4. Proactive self-defence. He wanted to demilitarize Ukraine. NATO's 30-year creep eastwards meant he was hemmed in by an increasingly hostile encirclement of countries. To evaluate these claims, let's address some of the overt lies of the war. They provide some insight into the war itself. Bear in mind that the purpose of an entity is what it does, not what it claims to be. Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream was an oil and gas pipeline between Russia and Germany that was intended to transport a major part of Europe's energy needs. So, it was lucrative for Russia, vital for Western Europe. In September 2022, 7 months after Russia invaded Ukraine, it was damaged beyond repair in 2 explosions, assumed deliberate. There are 6 players with a stake in the region and the plausible means to destroy an undersea oil pipeline. USA, Russia, Germany, Baltics, and Ukraine. Of these, only 2 have a serious and believable strategic motive, USA and Ukraine. Of these, only 1 announced, 17 days before the war began, that it would bring an end to Nord Stream 2 if Russia invaded Ukraine. Biden announced that at a press conference. I'll restate it for the hard of hearing. Biden announced the, quote, end of Nord Stream 2 ahead of time at a press conference. In due course, a few months after the war began, the pipeline was destroyed. It resulted in the biggest preventable outpouring of, quote, climate change causing, end quote, methane in history. Just as well, climate change is not even wrong, or Democrat voters would have been outraged at this. Then, almost non-stop afterwards, Russia was blamed for the destruction of its own lucrative gas pipeline. I found it difficult to say the last sentence without laughing. And in the end, a Ukrainian man, all by himself, was charged with coordinating the sabotage. In other news, Germany then had to buy a lot more gas from Norway and the US. NATO expansion. Speaking of lying about everything, Russian people, because of their experience under communism, believe political figures of all countries routinely lie for expediency and power. I happen to agree. See FutureDad 38, Why Do the Elite Lie About Everything? NATO's leaders are no exception. NATO told Russia it would stop advancing east on at least 3 separate occasions. 1990. During negotiations of East and West Germany, the US Secretary of State James Baker made ironclad guarantees that NATO would not expand, quote, an inch eastward if the Soviet Union cooperated on Germany. 1991. British Prime Minister John Major personally assured the then Russian Premier Gorbachev, quote, we are not talking about the strengthening of NATO, end quote. 1991 in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Manfred Werner told Russian Supreme Soviet deputies that, quote, the NATO Council and he are against the expansion of NATO, end quote. Yet NATO did expand. See the map. From NATO itself, the dark pink areas, which are 1997 to 2022, show where and when the expansion happened. In other words, despite the at least 3 assurances that they wouldn't, NATO expanded eastwards into Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland in 1999, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia 2004, Albania, Croatia in 2009, and Montenegro 2017, and finally North Macedonia in 2020. Seemingly, the only thing NATO didn't do after promising not to expand was to park its tanks outside the Kremlin. Corruption in Ukraine. Pre-war, Ukraine was known to be the most corrupt country in Europe. The country is infamous for its money laundering opportunities. The Clinton and Biden families were both embroiled in questionable dealings with energy companies there. Joe Biden, while VP to Obama, boasted on video of his ability to get a Ukrainian prosecutor fired. A prosecutor who was investigating corruption in the company which Biden's son was on the executive board. Biden's administration claimed it was because he wasn't investigating corruption enough. Choose which explanation seems most likely, ceteris paribus. By contrast, Trump was impeached based just on a phone call to Zelensky, in which he asked Zelensky to look into Hunter Biden's activities in a call which Trump knew was being recorded. Lies about the ease of resolution. Even Trump doesn't escape being part of the omnishambles. He made boastful, bombastic statements, as is his wont, about the speed with which the war could be halted. In fact, it was referenced often enough that it was practically a campaign promise in the run-up to the 2024 US election. Sure enough, he didn't stop the war via his negotiational weight, and certainly not in the one day that he claimed. Nonetheless, this is incidental to the ideology and direction of the war. Lies about lies. I'll reiterate that when it comes to Russia or Ukraine, I don't have a dog in the fight. If anything, since I'm native British, I grew up being propagandized to fear and mistrust Russia. I still do the latter, principally because I mistrust everyone and everything in the public eye. So what do I notice about the lies of this war? If you Google lies about Ukraine, you will get 2 pages worth of only Russian disinformation, but no Western disinformation. That's odd. So that's already a lie by omission and emphasis. We already know from lockdowns and other events that Google and the entire globalist apparatus cannot be trusted. Lies by Western leaders to Western citizens are commonplace, especially lies to cover their own previous lies. More importantly, Western leaders are no more likely to tell the truth about any war than I, FutureDad, am to breastfeed. Neocons care only about power. A major inflammatory driving force in this prolongation of the war are the US neocons on both sides of the aisle. Their ultimate goal is to sit on the king throne with the world as their empire, knee-deep in its treasure. Russia is a prize they can smell in the air, or at least they could in 2022, as well as they can blood in the water from any weakness. One particular loathsome warmongerer, Lindsey Graham, wants to grind Putin's war machine to a halt, presumably seeing every last Ukrainian man perish in this conflict is a sacrifice he's willing to take. So given this background tapestry and the salient facts, what can we say more than 3 years into the war about any of my 4 putative reasons for the war? 1. Ethnic solidarity. Putin has indeed invaded and controlled a land in which his perceived countrymen were being tyrannized and no further. You could argue that it was out of military exhaustion rather than a righteous campaign that he stopped after his limited gains in the east. The observable fact remains that he has stopped territorial gain. 2. Strategic avarice. War is about control of resources. You can bang on all you want about ego and power and ideology, but no one spills blood and treasure without expecting more treasure at the end of it. Every war has that dimension. So yes, the multi-trillion-dollar mineral deposits are crucial. Putin is evasive about that because it diminishes his high-minded claims about saving his people. But if he wanted only valuable mineral deposits, then he would have continued his march to Kiev. After 3 years, he hasn't. 3. Retributive justice. Russia, from its perspective, has partly achieved this, given that this is a proxy war between Russia and NATO's combined hardware and logistics. Then a bloody nose is being sported by the West. I know it's hard to spot under the gigantic permanent clown nose. On the other hand, the morass has bogged down the Russian war machine, and even the experienced tactician Putin has succumbed to the grinding reality of war. I wonder if the entire project will end up taking 4 times as long. 4. Proactive self-defense. Mission accomplished. Putin will consolidate gains and Ukraine will likely be a buffer zone, curtailing the eastward march of NATO for good. Putin has made inveterate Western regime changers look like paper eagles and has Vulcan nerve-pinched the globalist project. Conclusion. Given the lies, motivations, and verifiable facts, can we synthesize what we know so far in a fair and balanced conclusion? Based on the palpable actions that were taken, not routinely made claims and counterclaims, I would do it as follows. This was a battle of strategic hegemony. China is staying out because its main competitors will be financially and militarily weakened. BRICS will flourish in the aftermath. Globalism is on life support. The hubristic US attempt to puppeteer Ukraine to do its dirty work of depleting Russia of its manpower, whilst bulldozing evidence of the Biden and Clinton crime families, didn't pay off. Even Trump has stepped on a rake in failing to quickly negotiate a solution. Lastly, Russia is the only semi-honest actor in this violent theatre. In the final analysis, what happened was clear. Putin used NATO's betrayal and the defence of his country from encirclement to A. avenge and avert the slaughter of his countrymen, B. seize valuable Ukrainian treasure, and C. give the West a lesson in hard power. As everyone knows, bears are dangerous enough when at peace, far more when cornered. R.I.P. Gonzalo Lira. You were right about everything that mattered. FutureDad.